operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the Gators matchup against the Kentucky Wildcats this Saturday night in the Swamp at 7:45. This is definitely a big matchup for the Gators for multiple reasons. Of course, the first one being currently they're on a 3-game losing streak to the Kentucky Wildcats, which is unfathomable for a lot of us who witnessed the 30-plus year win streak against the Wildcats that ended not too long ago in 2018. Since then, the Wildcats have won 4 of the past 6 games. And hopefully it's not going to be 5 of 7. There are some things we're going to talk about on offense and defense that the Gators really must do to make sure they pull off the win and snap the streak. And the interesting storyline for this game, though, is in many ways, this game is a battle for bowl eligibility. And I say that because for Florida, we're looking at if they don't beat Kentucky, then they've got to win 3 of their final 5 games, which of course is the hardest stretch of the schedule. And we're talking about, of those 5 games, you have Georgia and Texas, who Georgia's not looking as unbeatable as they usually do, but still looks like a dang good team. And they play Texas coming up this Saturday around the same time that the Gators are playing. And then, of course, you play Texas in Texas. That's also going to be a very, very difficult game to win. Then you come home and you face LSU, who seems to be looking better and better. Of course, they lost their opener, but we saw them lose their opener a few years ago and end up in the SEC title game. So right now, they seem to be on a bit of a roll, especially after the come-from-behind victory in Death Valley this past Saturday night. And then following that up, of course, you have Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss coming to town, who are one of the best offenses and defenses, actually, in the SEC, which honestly is surprising, but you look it up, they're, I believe, top 10, top 15 in run defense in the nation. It's really crazy. It's not what you expect from an Ole Miss defense, at least since Lane Kiffin got there. And then, of course, the last game for the Gators is that game in the Swamp against FSU. Or not in the Swamp, sorry. Gosh, geez. Everyone's going to the comments right now say, it's not in the Swamp, it's at Joke Shambles. Yeah, it is. My bad. It was just saying about the 2 previous games in the Swamp, gave us the third one. Of course, that's not correct. It's going to be in Tallahassee. And rivalry game, no matter how bad FSU has looked, just like I would say for us, no matter how bad we've looked, going to be a tough rivalry game for sure. For the Kentucky team, again, we're talking about how this is essentially a game for bowl eligibility. If they don't beat us, they have a little bit easier path. Of course, they would have to win 3 of their next 5 games because as they sit at 3-3 as well. But next week, they've got Auburn. Then they go to Tennessee. They do have Murray State, so at least they have something. Unlike the Gators, they have a pretty much guaranteed win in there against Murray State. But then they go to Texas and finish the game against their rivals, Louisville, or finish the season, I should say, against their rivals, Louisville. So you would have to go perfect against Auburn, Murray State, and Louisville, which isn't like as difficult as what the Gators would be looking at. However, still difficult. Or you would have to be stealing one in Neyland or, dare I say it, in Austin. So really big turning point for the season for both teams. Now, that doesn't mean that the winner can't fall off a cliff, but if you're looking for a game where both teams are kind of at a crossroads, UF coming after blowing a 10-point second half lead to Tennessee, and Kentucky after losing by 7 to Vanderbilt, this is it. With that said, before we get into it any further, I do want to give a shout out to my friends at Alvarez Lawn Company. And these guys, they service the Central Florida area. If you've got just regular lawn maintenance you need done, or heck, even some cleanup still from Hurricane Milton, give my friends at Alvarez Lawn Company a call or text at 407-490-2617 for a free quote. Once again, give my friends at Alvarez Lawn Company a call or text for a free quote at 407-490-2617. You can also shoot them an email at alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. Alvarez Lawn Company, building plans that work for you. And so, just like every week, what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at the Florida offense, Kentucky defense, and see what the offense needs to do. Then we're going to look at the defense and see what the Gators need to do on defense to get the win. So, anyways, to start off, Florida on offense, 59th in the nation, 402.8 yards per game. Kentucky's defense is third in the nation at 251.5 yards per game. The two teams ahead of them are Texas and Tennessee. What I can tell you about Texas and Tennessee and why I think Kentucky is actually the best defense of the three is if you look at their schedules. Kentucky's first 6 games feature, Georgia, which is a pretty good offense, feature Ole Miss, which is one of the best offenses in the SEC. Also, I can't believe I'm saying this, feature Vanderbilt, who is also a pretty decent team offensively right now, put up 40-something on Alabama just a few weeks back in that upset. And so, in South Carolina, South Carolina did well against them in the second game, 31-6, but then Kentucky comes back the next week and loses by a point against Georgia. Should have won, but it was Kentucky's defense, and again, probably should have won because Kentucky should have had a pick in there that got called back, or at least a pick 6. And that was really, a great defensive effort there. Of course, held Ole Miss in Oxford to 17 points. In fact, the most points that they've given up all season was last week to Vanderbilt, and that was a whopping 20 points. And the Gators right now have been struggling to score against quality FBS teams. I think I put out a stat late last week where we're averaging right at 20, maybe a little bit less than 20 against FBS teams. I think are going to end up with a winning record. So is what it is. Point is, Gators need to score. Florida, 251 yards passing per game. That's 37th in the nation. As I've said in previous previews, right now we still haven't hit that number too much. I think we've hit this one once or twice. Of course, one of those being DJ Lagway's big Samford performance, which is still holding this ranking a little bit higher than what we've seen consistently production-wise from the passing game, where Kentucky's pass defense is 162.2 yards per game, which is 12th in the nation. And in the running game, Florida, 141.8 yards per game, 81st in the nation, and Kentucky's run D 83 or 89.3, which is 10th in the nation. So really tough task for this offense going up against a really, really good Kentucky defense. There are reports that Kentucky will be without Maxwell Hairston, who last year led the SEC in interceptions. In a way, that's great for us, but I'd also just give a little little word of caution, and that's he's been out since week 4. He's just not making it back. And the reason why I give that little bit of caution is he didn't play against Ole Miss. He didn't play, in some of these other games against or other games, sorry, they were off in there. So he didn't play against Ole Miss. He didn't play against Vanderbilt. And the reason why I want to bring that up is before I go, oh my gosh, they're missing this great player, which trust me, that will definitely help. But in their big upset of Ole Miss and then last week against Vanderbilt, that gave a new person time to get acclimated. It wasn't like, oh, this first game he's missing. We've got a guy who may not be sure of himself. And that still may be true, but it's a lot different between a first time start and someone who is a little bit more acclimated to being a starter in the role. And with that said, speaking of starters in a role, DJ Lagway, first SEC start of his career, and going against, again, what I think is the SEC's toughest defense. With that said, we're just like I say most weeks, because I see what these defenses were facing due to the run game. Granted, we did get some going last week at times, but you've got to hit balls down the field. I'm not saying they have to be 40, 50-yard balls. That'd be nice, but hit me some 10, 15-yard passes to back the defense off. I'd love to see some read option type plays with DJ Lagway, but with our backup being a walk-on in Aiden Warner, and no knock against Aiden, but with our backup being a walk-on, I just don't see Billy Napier trying to run DJ Lagway too much. As far as running game, I don't think I could be wrong, but I don't think it gets going unless we see that front seven of Kentucky be forced into spreading out because the Gators are having success beyond the line of scrimmage in the pass game, which Florida did well against Tennessee at times last week. Now it's time to build on that and do that against a pretty good Kentucky defense. If we try and just run at Kentucky a lot like we did early in the game last year, this will not work out too well, at least offensively, for the Gators. Now, another thing to just point out, injury report has come out, and it's looking like Florida on at least a questionable Montrell Johnson, questionable Bryce Thornton at safety, who's been honestly hit and miss at times. But again, when you're talking about safety depth, you have Asa Turner, who's also questionable, but he's been out since Miami. You've got two questionable safeties. Now, how much depth do we have if something happens? How much depth do we have if someone needs a break? That's definitely a question. And then you have Austin Barber on the O-line, listed as questionable. Devin Manuel, another offensive lineman, or another tackle, listed as out. So another place where depth could really become an issue. And that is especially true for both the Florida run game and pass game going against this Kentucky front seven. And Kentucky finds ways to cause havoc. Again, the most points that they've given up all year. And, well, sorry, take that back. South Carolina, 31 points in the second game of the season. But anyways, I know someone probably already put a comment. Hey, you were wrong. It was South Carolina. It's like, I corrected myself later. Hooray. So if you made it this far, thank you for leaving the comment. But yes, I did catch myself. But anyways, outside that weird South Carolina game, and the reason why I see that is weird is South Carolina has not been great this year, but somehow did really well against Kentucky. And then, of course, if I were to tell you, hey, they faced Georgia and Ole Miss, you think they'd probably have scored the most points on Kentucky. However, that's not true. Both teams, 13, 17 points. If I give you a lineup, again, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Georgia, Ole Miss, line them up in order of points scored on Kentucky, you would probably put in the exact opposite order or close to points given up. So that is something interesting going for the Gators is that Kentucky's been giving up points to the, I guess you could say, lower type opponents, and Florida, I would say, is right there in the middle of the 8 SEC opponents that Kentucky will face. Hopefully we get that overlooked type deal that maybe Vanderbilt and definitely South Carolina got, and not necessarily the focus or well scouted Georgia and Ole Miss deal. But again, if I had to say it, get some easy beyond the line of scrimmage passes going early to help open that. Probably, I say probably because stranger things have happened, will not be helping the offense at all. And so let's go ahead. Let's move on to the defense. But before we do, I want to give a shout out to my friends at GatorChatter.com. Gator Chatter, lots of fun discussion always happening on this Gator message board, including, and I know I've said it before, the Napier firing is imminent thread, because it's a running joke now for weeks that's been posted, and imminent doesn't mean what many people think it means, apparently. But with that said, I use that as an example. Lots of other fun discussion going on over there. Join the discussion now at GatorChatter.com, your Florida Gator sports bar. And so let's go ahead. Let's talk about what might be the biggest key of this game, and that's the Gators defense against the Kentucky offense. Make no mistake, as far as FBS offenses go, this is the absolute worst offense the Gators have faced all season. Kentucky on offense is averaging 321.7 yards per game, and that does include the numbers from their games against Southern Miss and against Ohio. 321.7 yards per game. That's good for 115th in the nation. It's like they have Doug Nussmeier calling their offense. And our defense, though, 87th in the nation, giving up 381.2 yards per game. So defense is not much better than their offense. However, defense has looked better the past few weeks, and some of that maybe we considered the past two teams to be a little bit better than they were. Some of that is there has been improvement. I think some of that, both things can be true. Nico obviously missed some big plays, some open deep passes, among other things last week. KJ Jefferson definitely not hitting passes too well himself, but also the change of Ron Roberts going up to the booth and Austin Armstrong coming down to the sidelines. If anything, Austin Armstrong is the rah-rah, get guys energized guy. And I think that does help quite a bit. So we can say the Gators have looked improved the past 2 weeks. However, maybe we have overrated those offenses just a little bit. But with that said, can't overrate the Kentucky offense. It is bad. Gators should, with the swamp going nuts at night, should be able to keep Kentucky relatively slow on the offensive side. Kentucky 121st in the passing game at 168.3 yards per game. Gators are 65th, allowing 213.5 yards per game through the air. And then Kentucky is 75th on the ground, 153.3 yards per game on the ground, where the Gators defense has allowed 167.7 yards per game. That is almost double what Kentucky allows and gets you to 97th in the nation. With that said, the defensive strategy should be pretty clear, and it's twofold, but the main thing should be to stop the run. I know I say that a lot. Stop the run, make Nico beat you. Stop the run, make KJ Jefferson beat you. It is what it is. stop the run at Ole Miss or against Mississippi State, make their QBs beat you. I felt nervous about this back end, but this back end generally has been better than I thought it may be, just as it's been mix and match of guys. Jason Marshall returning to form has really helped that. But also when you see a team that is 121st in passing, I mean, granted, their running is 75th, but if you can really force Vandergriff, their quarterback, to try and beat you through the air, he may get something. I mean, against Ole Miss, which I said surprisingly high, or I believe I said surprisingly high on the defensive rankings, Vandergriff got 243 yards. Now, again, when we're talking about some of the inversion weird things with who they've played, South Carolina, somehow he only had 30 yards through the air. So who knows? With that said, I trust Jason Marshall and company if you can stop the Kentucky run game. We all remember last year what Ray Davis did to the Florida Gator run game, and we don't want to see that again at all. And right now they're back. We'll call him Demi, his first name. It's Sumo Konbaye. I'm not going to be able to pronounce that too well. Haven't watched too much Kentucky, I'll be honest, this season. With that said, averaging 4.6 yards per carry. Vandergriff is a guy who, if you take away his sack yards, is averaging like 4 yards per carry. He's been sacked 14 times, and it lists him as 60 carries. That means he's carried the ball 46 times, and he's would be the second leading rusher on the team if you took away the 136 sack yards, because he'd be upwards of 220. But either way, he's not going to be a guy that's going to beat you with his legs, but he can be effective. With that said, again, you shut down that run game and you try and make him beat you. That's probably the best play here. Get to him, take advantage of the loud swamp, and get to it. It's going to be a lot of fun for this defense if they can. But again, stop that run game and then force them to pass it. Kentucky really has two wide receivers right now. The running back is third on the team in receiving yards with 90 for the year. That means only two guys have over 100 yards receiving on this Kentucky team. Dane Key is the leading receiver, 31 receptions for 452 yards. Just have Jason Marshall follow him around the field and play Key and remove him from the game as best as possible. Their second leading receiver, Barron Brown, 214 yards, which they've got 6 games. He's averaging 30-something yards per game, 35. Yeah, so you gotta do something here, Gators. Like, if you take away Key and you stop that run game, Brock Vandergriff is not going to be beating you. However, if you allow Key to just roam free, then you're going to probably have problems. In that upset of Ohio, or not Ohio, that was the game before, Ole Miss. Key had 105 yards. Again, limit Key, and you're going to have a good time if you stop the run and limit Key. And those are really what my keys are. Again, no pun intended. But anyways, for the offense, get the ball rolling by completing some downfield passing. Again, doesn't need to be like 30, 40, 50 yards, but things like 10 to 15 yards. And on defense, shut down that run game. Force Vandergrift to try and beat you while you have your best corner who's doing a phenomenal job right now, shutting down their top receiver. And if you do those two things, Florida's going to come out with a win. Florida's got a better offense, and I believe not a better defense, but comparatively a better matchup in the offense to defense to offense ratio. With that said, Florida, I have taking the streak, ending the streak against Kentucky, and I'm going to give it to the Gators 28-17. Some funny things happen in these matchups where Kentucky gets points. I just think that somehow with our athletes, whether it's Mizell, Wilson, DK, Badger, Baugh, Jacoby Jackson. Sorry. I just think there's enough there, along with DJ Lagway. Of course, we don't want to see him running too much and risking more. But with that said, I do think that those guys are going to end up doing just enough to get some points on the board. I think that this defense is capable of getting a few turnovers from this Kentucky offense. And with that, that's why I believe the Gators can get to 28 points, which would be their highest output so far against a team. Well, I don't know if I can say Kentucky would then finish with a winning record after talking about bowl eligibility, but I'd say it'd probably be the best result against a similar team or better so far this year. And with that said, everybody, thank you for listening. And as always, go Gators.